Thought I'd tell some dad stories. I'm old enough to remember the 50s. That was my childhood. Most of the people that want to conserve the past want to conserve the 60s or the 70s or the 80s or the 90s, whatever. In 1961, my English teacher assigned us to write an autobiography. So I did. My mother preserved it in a scrapbook, so I typed it up in a word processor and hired me a kid, an artificial one, to recite the essay. So this is my life from babyhood to high school. Let's take a look.
Babyhood to high school. I came into this world on a foggy September morning. 9 days later, I accompanied my mother, who was very sick, to my first home on a farm. On this tomato farm, we also raised cows, chickens, and an assortment of crops. Also living on this farm were 6 Jamaican workers and another family. I was the first of a family of 4 children, the youngest being 2.5 at present. When I was about 6 months old, I had a change of environment. I went to Indiana to another farm which had a fishing lake located on it. It was there I accomplished the art of walking. I was a hindrance after that, when Mom and Dad went swimming, since I had to stay on the shore. If I was left alone, I would follow them out until the water was over my head. This was a worry to all of us. We returned to the lake to swim and fish for family vacations in later years. We moved back home to a farmhand house in Ohio on a cold December day about 9 months later. On this occasion, I froze my feet. My mother took off my shoes and held me in front of the stove until I stopped crying. This farm was owned by the Leitner family, where Arts live now. Across the Angling Road lived the Ross Owens family. Ross's son, Jim, and I were the same age and had a lot of fun together. We made cement and played war games. In winter, Jim's older brother Dick would pull us on a sled through the snow. One day, I thought I would play with the chickens in their pen. I climbed the fence, but once inside, the rooster flew at me and grabbed the front of my snowsuit. I fought him off and scrambled back over the fence much faster than I climbed it the first time. I used to play with the neighbor's dog, until he bit me one day. Dad told the neighbor about it and I never saw the dog again. Dad said the neighbor took care of the problem. Another day, I thought I found a red ball in the field. I threw it around the yard for a while. I took it in the house to show Mom my ball. I tried to bounce it on the carpet in the living room. It broke all over the floor. It was not a ball. It was a tomato. One day, Dad brought home a Florida green lizard. He made a leash for it, tied it around its neck, and thumbtacked the other end to the windowsill. When he got home from work, the lizard was hanging by its neck from the windowsill, dead. He didn't think they would do that. After that, we moved into town, Delta, Ohio. I was still only 3. At this house, my baby brother Kenny was born. When I first saw him, I said, "Hey, I'm supposed to have that," since my dad had promised me a playmate. Mom wondered what Dad had been telling me. By now, I can recall many things of those days. I made some new acquaintances. One neighbor was Butch, 4 years older than me, but we still played together. Across the street lived a girl named Patsy. She frequently joined in our games. I remember a few things about living in town. I'll try to relate a few of them, some amusing. One time Butch was showing me his dog. It wasn't really a gentle dog, so we perched on top of the dog's house, which the dog didn't like. Finally, I decided to go home, which was only next door, since I was a little hungry. In sliding off the doghouse roof, I aroused the animal. He frightened me, so I yelled and ran, but his chain was longer than would have wished. The dog caught me the seat of my snowsuit, which required some mending after that. One day Butch's dad brought home 2 toy guns with holsters. He gave one to each of us. The toy guns had loud clickers when you pulled the triggers. Everyone on the block heard us that afternoon. One person I was a little afraid of was an old man who lived in the house next door. Much of the day he would sit on his front porch and rock in his chair. Once, he told me we had some chimney swifts in our chimney. I thought this was a great curiosity and spent time looking for them. One day, Butch and I got into a small trailer, parked behind the old man's house. We began running from one end to the other. This created a dull thumping noise. We didn't suspect the old man came out and was inside the shed which we were behind. We were shocked to hear a gruff voice say, "Get off, you kids, and beat it." We fled in terror, not seeing where the voice came from. After that, we knew enough to avoid his house lest we would disturb him and bring him out.
Gonna have to cut my narrator a little slack. He doesn't speak Midwest very well.
In May of 1951, we moved 2 miles north of Ohio in Amboy Township. Shortly after we moved, my sister Patty arrived. The following year, I started school. Although I lived in Amboy Township, I went to school at Fulton Local School. I was quite thrilled at this because I was going to Jimmy and Judy's Setter School. This was a new idea to me, to go to school where my cousins went to school. I remember only my first few moments with my first grade. One person who drew my attention was a boy named Bill Herrick. He sat in front of the first row, where I was seated. Since my seat was in the back, I had to lean way over to see him. This act drew much attention to me and I didn't like being looked at. I liked my first grade teacher very much. I was surprised to see that her lips were very red. When I told my mom, she thought that was very amusing. I had a hard time calling a person Miss, Mrs., or Mr. Somehow the class got to calling our teacher as just teacher. To this, Miss Spring would answer, "Yes boy," or "Yes girl." Then she would remind us what her name was and what we should call her. The second grade teacher was Mrs. Kling, who is still teaching here at Fulton now. I thought it is third grade she is teaching. Our school must have been very small in relation to students enrolled. I can remember sitting across the aisle from Max Fetterman, 1 grade ahead of me. I remember I had to ask him how to spell air. The third grade teacher we knew was Ellen's own mother, Mrs. Lehman. This year I learned to love reading. It has been a big part of my life ever since. Mrs. Parson was our 4th grade teacher. One person I well remember was Marion Eden. I remembered him because I associated his name with the Garden of Eden in the Bible, and he was missing 2 fingers, cut off at the first joint by a lawnmower accident. Once when he brought a snake to school, he put it in Mrs. Parsons' desk. She was more surprised than frightened, but she refused to take it out. This duty fell to Marion. Construction on the new part of our school was underway by now because I can remember standing by a window and watching the men working. Mrs. Roofer hid us in our 5th year of grade school. That year we went to Oak Openings Park for a class trip. We had Miss Broadbeck for our 6th grade. Now she is known as Mrs. Ram. This was her first year of teaching, so of course we were her first class. We enjoyed that year very much. In the 7th grade, we had a complete change of schedule and teachers. It was a little difficult getting adjusted. We changed classrooms and had several teachers, including 2 men, and also voted for class officers. Jim Owens was our president and Jack Hoffman was our vice president. This year I was class treasurer. In September of that school year, Connie, my little sister, came to live with us. Our 8th and 9th grades were similar. My freshman year was the first time I was allowed to choose my subjects. Since General Science and English 9 were required, I chose Algebra 1 and French 1. On most holidays, I went to my grandparents' home for dinner. Usually all Dad's relatives were there. In summer of 1957, my family took a trip to New York State. We stayed on a dairy farm in Camden, New York. One big highlight of this week was when I went to see McConnellsville Sand. Back where they had been digging, we saw hills of sand so high they would take your breath away to look down from the top. Trucks were hauling loads of sand to refineries, and from there, this sand was shipped to all parts of the country for glass making. I have always been interested in many things. Whenever I took up something new, I would get a book about it and study how it works, and learn the principles about it. Since we had a pond for 9 years, I have built many boats of all kinds. My first ones were very crude, but I am improving on them. My first sailboat had square sails. My largest and best was made from a board 6 inches wide and about 2 inches deep. I shaped its hull and used a mast that stood about 18 inches high. I employed a double rudder. My ship was 2 feet long, complete with cargo space. It performed very well, as Jim Owens can tell you. I've built a couple with triangle sails, but they are difficult to construct, so it works well. I am now working on my second motor-powered boat. I also like rockets and airplanes. Since they require more time and exactness, I haven't attempted building any, although I have been successful building models. I have a growing interest in photography and radio. I read books about them. I am always gaining new knowledge in these fields. I have always liked animals and have grown up around them. Among the pets I've had are dogs, cats, chameleons, ducklings, frogs, crayfish, fish, turtles, goats, and a mud puppy. I've helped raise chickens, ducks, rabbits, and pigs. I like to participate in sports, although I'm not really good. I enjoy ice skating and roller skating. I do these best. I also enjoy swimming and water sports, as well as baseball and basketball. I also like to play badminton and volleyball. When I was in the 5th grade, I was given the chance to play a musical instrument. I chose a trumpet. Mr. Lewis was my first instructor. Later, I took private lessons from Mrs. Hayden. Now I play second trumpet, second chair under Mr. Topolska's direction. Besides band, I have belonged to other organizations, such as Little League Baseball, Pony League Baseball, 4-H, church membership, church youth club, Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, junior high basketball, and freshman basketball. I have been choosing my subjects so I can enter engineering college. I want to use my high school years to full advantage to prepare me for a science career.
That science career didn't work out very well. While in engineering school, I discovered that engineering pranks and partying and piddling around and organizing swirly parties doesn't mix with advanced calculus. And that's how I wound up in the Army about 6 months later. Life does take its turns.